Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge, and welcome to Eldridge and Company. Katrina Vanden Huevel is the editor of The Nation magazine, defender of reason and democratic values, and the star opponent of the radical right. What an opponent for them to have.
I'm much happier to be here with you today than opposing any radical right TV people.
But it is deceptive because one looking at you would never think that, but you are one of the strongest voices that we have, that we hear these days. Well, what is happening in this country?
I would say that this country has been hijacked by a group of ideologues, neoconservatives. This is the most extremist administration in my lifetime. It is not an administration in sync with the majority values of this country, whether it's at home or abroad. So I think it's time to take back America. I was struck today to read that John Kerry, and one wishes for more boldness and all, but has decided to take on Langston Hughes's poem and talk about let America be America. And there is something in that to restore the promise and soul of a country which has lost its way, which, Ronnie, I mean, you know, this country is a great land. It should be leading through hope, not fear and not resentment. And what is so tragic in these last couple years is how hated America has become. I would have said recently that it really was a matter of a hatred of the Bush administration around the world, but I fear that it has slowly been seeping into more hatred of America and a questioning of what is it in this country that has allowed this fifth-rate man to be a leader of this great country.
It is quite amazing. It's do you think they really believe what they're doing, don't they? They really believe in it and what they say?
I think some of them do. I think we also, of course, have to understand, you know, we're a couple miles from 9/11. The world has been changed since then. Of course, we need a reconfiguration of security and liberty to a certain extent. But this country has faced great dangers before. In this war on terrorism, which I think so many have bought into this idea of war, we've bought into what Karl Rove and George Bush wanted, which is a kind of war without end, which I fear is subverting the very values we claim to be fighting for in the world.
Why is it a war? I mean, why do they? What I always try to think about is
they wanted to make it a war.
They're driven by their religious beliefs, aren't they? Some of them.
These are our fundamentalists. These are our fundamentalists. I was struck reading last night the Nobel Peace Prize winner this year, and there are some hopeful signs in our world. Shirin Ebadi, a wonderful Iranian lawyer who has fought the fundamentalists in her country, said, you know, we have religious repression, but there is also a repression of kind of a cant about national security. And these are fundamentalists, many of them in the White House. Now, Karl Rove, I think, is a very savvy operator, and he hasn't even unpacked his bag of dirty tricks yet, and we're seeing one of the dirtiest campaigns, presidential campaigns we've ever seen. That says a lot. But yes, there are some true believers who thought that by going to war against Iraq, we would remake the Middle East. And there was oil. There's the issue of Israel and security. There's this messianic militaristic belief that you're going to bring democracy through the barrel of a gun, and you don't. It comes through indigenous forces, through people's own desire for sovereignty. I think what we're seeing in Iraq is possibly the greatest mistake an American president has ever made, and the repercussions are such that every day on our front pages, we've opened up a Pandora's box. That's saying it too nicely. But just yesterday, the very prestigious institute, the International Institute of Strategic Studies in London, has said, and this is not a radical operation, that this war in Iraq has now become a recruiting tool for al-Qaeda. It is really endangering us in ways that we didn't understand. We did, many of us, those who marched, those who protested.
It was a unifying thing that they're able now to use as the symbol to do this. But these are, this Christian fundamentalist, this religious basis to all of this, it's so confusing to people who aren't students of religion. I mean, when you think that someone has found God or follows the teachings of Jesus, one thinks of supposedly worrying about other people and taking care of them.
And true compassion. True compassion. And this is a president who said to Bob Woodward in his book, Plan of Attack, Woodward asked him, did you consult with your father? Who, by the way,
Right.
represented the true conservative wing of this party. These are not conservatives.
Right,
And that's why you see a lot of conservative dissension about this presidency. And Bush said, no, I spoke to a higher father. I mean, if he did, in fact, believe, speak to a higher father might have said to him, President Bush, maybe you should have some doubts. Maybe you should question your assumptions before you mislead a nation into war on the basis of a kind of messianic belief. And I think it's a real danger in a society that is stronger because of its pluralistic religious beliefs and has this tradition, which is being eroded, of a separation between church and state.
He has so many different reasons. They're so shifty. They go from the weapons of mass destruction to this bringing democracy to this. They have, and this fervor for democracy in Iraq when the same administration is in fact affecting our democracy at home.
This administration is eroding our democracy at home. It is perhaps the most secretive administration. I mean, John Dean, counsel to former President Nixon, knows something about secretiveness and paranoia. And he's made the case that it's standard operating procedure in this White House. I mean, it is the most secretive, the most capable of stonewalling. He also makes the case that no one died for Nixon's Watergate abuses, and we've seen that here. There was a student, I believe she's going to Vanderbilt Law School, just recently wrote a senior thesis, and it was interesting because she found 23 rationales given by this administration for going to war against Iraq. Can you imagine? Every day, you recall, in the run-up to war, there was, and in the aftermath of this failed occupation, disastrous occupation, there was a shifting rationale. It was democracy, of course, the weapons of mass destruction, which haven't been found. It's a really disastrous.
So some of us can tell emotionally or instinctively there's something wrong. Some of us are much more informed. I mean, you're very informed and you read a lot, and so you know a lot. Why hasn't this reached the American public? I mean, why, even as the president's poll figures go down, still ask the question of who do you think can lead us best now? He's still higher than Kerry or anybody else. I mean, why hasn't this really mobilized the American public more?
I begin with a number of thoughts. One is, too often, I think, liberal progressive politics, and I don't speak for you, but begins with this view that, the American people are clueless or they don't care. I think any progressive politics that begins as a starting point that the American people are not smart about this is dead on arrival. I do think Americans are misinformed, ill-informed, because so many of them, Ronnie, get their news from television, this medium we're on, because they don't have time. They're holding down 2 jobs. They're whooped with fatigue. And if you look at our television landscape in these last years, it's disastrous. And I think, and talk radio, hateful, most of it, except Air America, this liberal station, I think is doing quite well. So I think many Americans just aren't getting the news that will allow them to make informed decisions, and they don't have the time. Consolidation of media, the right-wing skewing of television. I mean, this myth of a liberal media, I mean, even Bill Kristol and Pat Buchanan on good days have admitted it's a myth. So I think, we need to get the message out. The internet, I think, has been a good force. Move on. There are other internet forces. If people find some of news, information, and it holds leaders accountable. It holds them accountable for their lies. And I think that's a hopeful sign.
But I don't think the news is only television. I think increasingly what's happened, and I think this goes back to the Bush administration, is the employment of all these public relations people and these handing out of press releases, and they're being taken by the people who receive them as the truth. There's
Absolutely.
no longer an investigative arm to it. Nobody questions anything. They just say, this is it.
There's too little skepticism, and I think in the aftermath of 9/11, we had an administration that continues to today, which equated questioning, tough questioning, and skepticism with disloyalty and being un-American. And I think that seeped deeply into the psyche of many in this country, including the journalists. So you find even at a prestigious paper like the New York Times, in these last days, they've had to issue mea culpas about how they were also accepting without question the disinformation provided by this administration or by exiles like Adnan Chalabi. So, you have to wonder, there was a rush to judgment. There was a kind of drumbeat for war, which began from the White House and was accepted by too much of our media. And that's a real disservice to the American people. I think the reality on the ground now, the disasters we're seeing unfolding, Bush's plummeting job numbers, the fact that a majority of Americans feel the country's heading in the wrong direction, has had an impact on the press, which is returning to its more skeptical role.
I did. I heard on television that the announcement the president had of the new Iraqi government, where he said that he had nothing to do with it. It was all done by...
Osmosis?
No,
Harry
the man
Potter?
from the UN, you know.
Lakhdar Brahimi, yeah.
Yeah, Brahimi, that he really didn't know. And the commentator was so moved to say, well, we really don't know what happened because the Iraqi Governing Council says it's all being run by the Americans. So it's it was
They're
the
not
first
getting
time
away
I've
with
heard
as
it
much.
questioned on, and
Yeah.
that was on CNN. But that's so important, and I think that people have to understand that because we're so used to it, and I don't quite understand when we became so accepting of authority the way we have recently, and I suppose a lot of it is 9/11.
9/11, but also I think it was a response, a reaction to Watergate. You know, a
I was gonna say, we
backlash,
go
a
back to
backlash.
Watergate.
And also, you know, you have to, with all due respect for a generation younger than I am, you know, they were raised in a
They've
period
never known
where
that life
there was
could be
much more
different.
trust of the administration, and there
Right.
was a backlash against Vietnam, against Watergate, less questioning. So they were ready to sort of be accepting of official line,
It
and
is.
that's changing, I hope, because we've seen, as with Vietnam, the misleading, the lying of a government and the consequences. And majority of Americans do now believe we were misled into war, and that's important.
That is a very important thing. You've edited a book that is a wonderful title, Taking Back America and Taking Down the Radical Right. It's a series of articles by other people.
It's a series of essays, everyone from
published
Bill
by the Nation,
Moyers,
isn't it?
Nation
Nation
Books,
Books.
which is a new
Right.
imprint we've started. We've been publishing about 20 books a year in the last couple of years. But it emerges from a conference that was held last year, organized by the Campaign for America's Future. And it's really everyone from Bill Moyers and Barbara Ehrenreich, William Greider. It's I hope, a kind of sassy, strategic counter to the radical rights blueprint for how to build a progressive force. It's not a blueprint for the Democratic candidate, though in it there are many
References to-
strategic ideas. But it's really about, you know, it's about, okay, let's change the occupant of the White House. Let's have peaceful democratic regime change, which we must have in order to build a progressive movement. And it will take not a year, but it'll take a generation. And it's about recruiting new leaders. It's about building a movement, and it's about building a politics of passion and principle, and driving that into the national electoral debate and the movements.
Do you think, you talk about developing new strategies, and do you think one of the difficulties in this current campaign is the lack of newer people with different perspectives, so that we're sort of getting a reworking of old strategies? That's at least how I feel. I look at Kerry's campaign, and I mean, God knows I hope he wins, and will do everything I can.
Yeah.
But it's not electrifying people, and this is a time when people could really be
I couldn't
excited
agree with
and
you more.
electrified.
That's what I mean. I think that the desire, and again, these are sometimes cliches, but it's so true, the desire for a bolder leadership, for a Democrat who would really stand up and speak for core progressive values. You know, Howard Dean should not be relegated as a footnote in this last campaign. There were a lot of things going on. Iowa, as my colleague Jonathan Schell said, became a smoke-filled state in a curious way. There's such a desire to get rid of Bush that the view was made that Kerry was more electable. But Dean stood up at a crucial moment and said, we are the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party. We need two full political parties in this country, not Bush light, and spoke for some core values. And that's what this is about, not this Democratic Leadership Council mantra of hewing to the center, which has defined the Democratic Party in
for
these last...
too long a time.
Yeah.
And Bill Clinton and his campaign and his administration. But now you see the same people and the same thing coming along, and it's a very distressing thing.
This book is predicated on the view that we need to have sort of two visions in our mind. One is we need to take back the White House because this is the most important election in our lifetime. then we
Change.
The house is on fire. It's not time to remodel the house, but then we build for the long term to build this movement, to take back the Democratic Party and to have more views and more choices in our electoral system, because we have a downsized politics of excluded alternatives in too many cases in what we see.
I've been a voter in every single election that I've been able to vote in since 1952. And I ran as a dean delegate, and I was excited by that campaign. And I haven't been excited since 1968. Well, a little bit in other times, but, not at the final point of it. And dismayed at that. But what happened was, not only do we have the same political pundits who are always giving us advice on what we should do, the people believed it.
I know.
That was what I think the problem was when you talk about Iowa. Why did Dean do so?
Dean made some missteps, there's no question about it. But the media was a pack, ready to get him. When he came out on that stage, maybe some of your viewers don't remember, but he came out in Iowa. We now know that it was mic'd in a way that you didn't hear the roar in the back.
Right. So we heard him screaming.
He was going down
was after
already.
They voted.
He was going down already, though, because the media had told citizens, this guy isn't electable. Now, what are they, why are they? And this is the problem in our system. It's not just the re-rotation of old faces. And I see that particularly on the foreign policy side of Kerry's campaign.
Absolutely.
But, listen,
and then
to
Jamie
really
Rubin,
go back,
and I don't mean to pick on him, but he's now come back to travel with him.
To go back to prior to 1952 and Roosevelt, I remember, and you've heard it in different ways, he was told, I think, by the first woman Secretary of Labor,
Frances
Perkins, she said, you've got to do this, you've got to do this. He said, go out and make me do it. And that is what some of these pieces are about, to build an independent capacity, as the right did in its own way. So you take a playbook, a page from the playbook of the right without losing our values, and you build an independent capacity to push the Democratic Party to take stands, which it should, because it should mobilize its base and not just always go for the swing voters. It's a wrong strategy.
Which is what we did in the past. I mean, we did it. Well,
it's a winning strategy.
Some people always say that the anti-war movement really didn't do it, but we still did it. I think it caused a lot of change. The civil rights movement caused, in a way, the whole Brown versus the Board of Ed decision. And certainly we worked with getting Kennedy into the election in 1968. But we're not doing that. We don't do that anymore. You're right.
But we're more than, if we're going to be more than the sort of sum of our parts, we need to build this infrastructure. And I have a chapter in here about what's out there that can be coordinated and put together, because we're strong on the ground. We're strong. And I do think, again, the thesis of this book is that on fundamental issues, Americans are far more in sync with the progressive agenda, core liberal progressive values, than they are with this failed conservative crap we've been getting.
Oh, totally. I agree with you. I mean, just look at the Walmart in California. People will do anything to protect their neighborhoods and their things, and sometimes we don't think that's very progressive, but sometimes, but the basic motivation is. Yeah. And so we need to do that. So who tells us the best in here?
Well, Moyers gives a sense of the history of the progressive challenge. Bill Greider has a very important piece about, again, to take a page from the playbook of the right, to look at what they've built, but to take it in our direction. But he also makes the case at the top of the book about why we need to take back America, because he argues that the right wants to roll back the hard-earned rights and liberties of the 20th century and unmake almost everything good about America, from Head Start to habeas corpus. I lay out, and even though I'm at a magazine of ideas and news, but mine is quite strategic in terms of really giving concrete examples of what's on the ground at the state level, the national level, in terms of electoral politics, movement, media, to put things together. And the progressive majority is a small group I mentioned. It's hopeful. It has a lot of traction, and it's identifying candidates at the state and national level, future Paul Wellstones, for example, and funding them and training them and supporting them. And I think that's where we need to look for some hope, because it's pretty bleak right now.
It is.
In terms of the general picture one wakes up to every morning. But the Bush people...
Let's expand it a little bit to the larger scheme of, well, you talked about television, reality television. The taste and level of entertainment and information that's given to the American public.
Yeah.
Was the nation active in the FCC decisions?
Very. Well, I have to say that in 1996, a special issue we put out called The National Entertainment State was picked up by Frank Rich and talked about, we had our first ever centerfold. It was a centerfold laying out the media landscape and the octopi of the media world. So we were at the very beginning of the fight against media consolidation and what it meant for our views and news. We were one of the many groups, along with Move On, which brought 2 million people to petition the FCC to say, no, we want our media back. We want our media and democracy back. Michael Kopp's the FCC commissioner, is coming into the nation tomorrow. He's been involved in talking to us about the next stage, about what citizens can do. I think that's hopeful. Again, going back to the internet, you know, we need the movements in the streets, but the internet has been very important in catalyzing millions of people to come together, to make demands on their leaders, and also was interesting in the Dean campaign how it was able to break the grip of big money. To some extent, much more needs to be done.
Definitely.
But the small donor base. And Howard Dean had a very interesting statement about that. He was asked once by a Democratic poobah, you know, you got to take a different position on trade, like move away from your fair trade position. And Dean said, you know, I'm not. I have a different base. And the guy said to him, I won't name names, but then he said, I'm not going to go to my Wall Street people to help you. And that's where you see the problems in the Democratic Party in terms of the money grip. It should be the party of organized people, of, you know, ordinary Americans. It's become a division, I fear, between sometimes socially liberal, which is good, but you need that economic core too, the support for working people and their values.
And you also need to open it up so that people can participate in the campaigning, and that I think is one of the largest disadvantages, don't you think?
Well, you know, my father's been involved in Democratic politics for years. And he still is in his way. But, you know, he says to me now, it's a different generation. I mean, when people want you to get involved, when you get the phone calls, it's the money. It's the money, and there should be a different way of participation. And Dean, I think, and others have tried to find a way to do it.
And Dean people are still doing the meetups, because I just got an email about the meetups.
He set up his movement, and his media guru, Joe Trippi, other people.
Right.
So I see some hope in that. I mean, it's not the, you know, there's no answer to everything, but there's some opening of the system.
And it's also partly it then ties into the media, because all the money that they need is to buy the television time that the networks, that the stations are selling on our airways.
If CBS will give it to them. I mean, you recall
then they don't do it.
You know, there were some cases where they were denied airspace, which I think is a real repudiation.
So have you traveled around the country? Are you traveling?
I don't travel enough. I go, my husband is from Owensboro, Kentucky. We were there in the weeks after 9/11. That was very important to me. My cousins live in Mooresville, North Carolina, which is NASCAR territory. It's the home of former Dale Earnhardt. I will admit I was one of the few New Yorkers, not the few, many, who didn't know.
Oh, who he was?
Yeah, when I didn't follow NASCAR for all. But you know, there are people, I think this blue state, red state stuff is overstated because, you know, North Carolina is a very different state than it was 20 years ago. You see John Edwards and shifting demographics, lots of Latinos in my cousin's community. And within each red state, there's a core blue state group, and that's why you see it so sharply divided. Obviously, we need to bring in more people.
So are you optimistic about this election from a Democratic point of view?
If there's justice in the world and the big money doesn't overwhelm Kerry, I think it's a referendum on a failed presidency. But I do think, as I said, that Karl Rove hasn't unpacked his bag of dirty tricks yet, and the money will be so fierce, and the misrepresentations and mendacity so high.
The nation was, we're running out of time, but the nation was very outspoken when Nader was considering his entrance into the race. You still are.
Well, we published an open letter asking Ralph Nader, who wrote one of his first pieces for The Nation in 1959, not to run. The stakes are too high this year. He says many good things. He should say them as public citizen number one, not as a candidate in a year when we've had an administration that is waging an illegal war abroad and waging war on citizens at home.
And some of his things should be taken up by the Democratic candidate. It would make life much easier,
if
right?
John McCain, if Kerry's going to play footsie about bringing John McCain on the ticket as a vice president, try and bring Nader in, have him speak at the convention, take up one or two of his core issues. The war's tough. I think Kerry's having I wish he did have a coherent, credible exit strategy. He seems, but you know, I don't think we can have a different foreign policy, or America can be restored to its role in the world, the one it should play, until this administration exits. And that's the key.
I wanted really to ask you whether you thought we could just withdraw from Iraq.
I do. I do too. I think it's now untenable. And I think that the U.S. forces have become the magnet for increasing instability and violence, and that we need a coherent exit strategy, a timetable for withdrawal. We need to provide economic, humanitarian assistance to the Iraqis to play a role in whatever international election possibilities there are. But our staying now, after Abu Ghraib and the torture scandal, 80% of Iraqis see us, you know, as occupiers, want us to leave, and that was before the prison torture
And an army of
scandal.
occupation is an army of oppression. There is no doubt.
History tells us that, and so I think the sooner, of course, there will be instability, but it is already becoming this breeding ground for wider regional instability.
So where is the book purchasable?
It is purchasable in bookstores. It's also purchasable at www.thenation.com and at Nation Books, which is also www.
And the website is a very important website and available to everybody. Do you print each week,
We print about half the issue, and I write a weekly web column. We have all kinds of web-only material and lots of activism as well as part of it.
And well, thank you very much, Katrina Vanden Huevel. And please look at that website. It is a very interesting one, www.thenation.com. Thank you very much.